Hi everyone. Today we're going to unfold a story so unexpected it sounds like fiction, but it isn't. It starts with two people from completely different worlds and a flight neither of them planned to take. What happened next would challenge global narratives, spark a massive online movement, and maybe even change how you think about your place in the world. You'll never believe it, but one missed connection in Dallas led to a seat next to a revolutionary. And a young Congresswoman on the same plane, on the same day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And comment below with your location and local time. I want to know where you're watching from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started tonight. The sky was overcast above Charles de Gaulle Airport, and the terminal buzzed with the quiet chaos of delayed flights. Jasmine Crockett wasn't even supposed to be in Paris. Her original flight out of Brussels had been cancelled, forcing her to reroute. Somewhere across the same terminal, Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's transitional president, had also been diverted. He was returning from a quiet diplomatic visit in Europe, hoping for a rare moment of anonymity. Neither knew the other was there. Not until seats 12C and 12D were called. A young black woman in a fitted blazer, headphones around her neck, a sharply observant man with sand-colored skin, eyes as still as a soldier's breath. They nodded politely. Strangers. But fate had a blueprint. As the plane taxied and the engines roared to life, the standard silence between seatmates filled the air. Jasmine opened a worn paperback book on social equity. Ibrahim stared out the window, watching the runway blur into memory. But then, turbulence. The kind that makes strangers look at each other. Jasmine joked, "Didn't sign up for a roller coaster?" Ibrahim smiled slightly, replying in perfect English, "Life rarely asks for our permission." That line cracked something open. For the next 7 hours they talked, not about the superficial things strangers normally share. No, their conversation tunneled deeper. Jasmine spoke of the people in her district, those without housing, those who felt unseen. She told stories that didn't fit into news cycles, of mothers crying in clinics, of teenagers in jail cells, too poor for bail. Ibrahim listened, occasionally interjecting with stories of Burkina Faso's struggle for sovereignty, of villages still rebuilding after French colonization, of his frustration with Western policy lenses. He spoke not as a politician, but as a soldier who once slept under trees, guarding his people from forces the world chose to ignore. Their words wrapped around each other like old songs. It wasn't agreement, it was alignment. Jasmine didn't understand Sahel politics, but she understood resistance. Ibrahim didn't know the streets of Dallas, but he recognized oppression, and as they shared, without realizing it, something in the plane shifted. A flight attendant noticed the energy between them, took a quick photo. No flash, no warning. Just a simple image. Two people leaning toward each other in deep dialogue with clouds outside their window. By the time the wheels touched down in New York, they had exchanged numbers and parted with a nod. No declarations. Just the silent acknowledgement that something meaningful had happened. They didn't post about it, but someone else did, and the world would soon follow. It started with a single post. The photo, the one taken silently by the flight attendant, surfaced on social media a day later. No captions. Just an image of Jasmine Crockett and Ibrahim Traoré mid-conversation, framed by the fading light of the sky at 30,000 feet. The internet did what it always does. It speculated. Who were they? What were they talking about? Was it staged? Why did they look so connected? The mystery only added fuel, but the truth was even more powerful than the guesses. Two worlds had collided, not by mistake, but by some strange magnetic force of history. And inside that narrow fuselage, between rows of half-asleep travelers and recycled air, a kind of awakening had begun. Jasmine, back on U.S. soil, resumed her packed schedule: hearings, press appearances, community work. But something had shifted. She kept replaying the conversation with Ibrahim, not just his words, but the weight behind them. His tone when he said, "A nation without its own voice is just a mirror for someone else's story." She thought about that a lot. Meanwhile, Ibrahim was back in Ouagadougou. His return was quiet, no motorcade, no media frenzy. But inside, he was stirred. Jasmine had spoken of systems that claimed to be free, but were built on quiet chains. Her words echoed in him as he walked through markets, past children with chalk on their palms and vendors with hope in their eyes. They were separated by an ocean, but both carried the imprint of the same conversation. It wasn't just the topics, it was the realization that despite their different struggles, the root was similar: control, power, the right to tell your own story. When Jasmine gave a short interview that week, a journalist offhandedly asked if she had met anyone inspiring recently. She paused, smiled and said, "Yeah. A brother from Burkina Faso. He reminded me how much we still have to fight for." The clip went viral. People connected the dots, the photo, the quote, the identity. And suddenly 2 names were trending, one from West Africa, one from Washington, D.C. People wanted to know more. Comment sections were flooded. "This is the conversation the world needs." Imagine if more leaders talk like this. Where can I hear more from them? But here's the twist. It wasn't the media's noise that mattered. It was the quiet impact. One teacher in Chicago printed the photo and placed it on a classroom wall under the word dialogue. A small-town radio station in Ghana ran a segment discussing what African youth could learn from American grassroots politics. A spoken-word artist in Atlanta composed a piece titled "Window Seat to Revolution." And Jasmine and Ibrahim? They began texting. Simple things at first, notes of encouragement, links to articles, book recommendations. But eventually they began dreaming aloud. "What if this moment wasn't just viral?" Jasmine texted one evening. "What if it was vital?" Ibrahim replied the next morning. "Then we must move, not for cameras, but for consequences." Neither of them were idealists. Both had tasted cynicism, bureaucracy, fatigue, but neither had ever been afraid to do something unpopular. So they decided to meet again, this time on purpose. But it wasn't to make a statement, it was to make a plan. They chose Lisbon, not Washington, not Ouagadougou. Lisbon was neutral ground, quiet, coastal, carved by centuries of ships and revolutions, a place where history lingered in the alleys but didn't overwhelm. They met at a cafe with wooden chairs that creaked with stories and windows that framed the Atlantic like a painting. No entourage, no headlines, just 2 voices, stronger now. They spoke for hours, letting the world outside their window disappear. Jasmine brought notes, names of organizers, local leaders, neighborhoods ripe for reawakening. Ibrahim came with hand-drawn maps of rural education centers and draft plans for decolonial curricula. "We're not just talking," Jasmine said as she sipped from her glass. "We're building." "Movements," Ibrahim replied, "don't begin with money. They begin with memory." That phrase stayed with her. Memory. They remembered the stories that had been buried, ancestors who resisted, communities that healed without the world watching, children who dreamed despite dust and danger. They spoke of black farmers in Mississippi and women's cooperatives in Burkina Faso, of young people tired of empty promises and old systems. That cafe became their war room, their sanctuary, their spark. Word got out. Someone snapped another photo, Jasmine scribbling ideas on a napkin, Ibrahim leaning in, listening with the intensity of a man building something sacred. The photo made it online within hours, tagged with #AwakeningFlight. And this time, it wasn't just admiration, it was mobilization. Activists began reaching out, some from Harlem, others from Bamako, some even from London and Rio. They didn't want to just talk about the photo, they wanted to act on the spirit of it. Soon, a digital platform launched, Seats of Change, where people could share what inspired their political awakening, stories of police stops, border crossings, ancestral wisdom, forgotten villages. Each post was a piece of a growing quilt, stitched together by global solidarity. A high school in Oakland started a flight club where students held weekly forums on civic power and cultural identity. In a remote part of Senegal, young organizers translated Ibrahim's speeches into local dialects and distributed them by radio. And still Jasmine and Ibrahim kept it simple, no headlines, no sound bites. They met again 2 months later in Ghana, then in Tulsa. Each time they moved quietly, each time they left behind a trace of something larger than them. At a round table in Accra, a young girl asked them, "Do you think you can really change the world with just conversations?" Jasmine leaned forward, her voice soft. "Conversations built empires, conversations broke chains, and conversations, when they're honest, can start revolutions." The room fell silent. And then applause, not loud, but honest. The kind that doesn't just come from hands, but from hope. The ripple was now a wave. By the time spring arrived, Jasmine had organized the first People's Seat Summit in Detroit. Not in a luxury ballroom, but in a converted factory space. No VIP sections, no polished speeches. Just folding chairs arranged in a circle, microphones passed like batons, and one simple rule: speak as if the world depends on it. Because in many ways it did. People flew in, students, farmers, retired teachers, local healers, mechanics, dreamers. And in the center of it all stood Jasmine, wearing no title, only her truth. Ibrahim joined via livestream from Burkina Faso, surrounded by a group of teenagers from Bobo Dioulasso. They waved at the screen, excited, nervous, ready. A translator moved seamlessly between English and French, but truth doesn't always need translation. You could feel it. Jasmine spoke first. "We all have a seat in the story of the world, but some of us have been standing too long, waiting for someone to pull up a chair." The room nodded, murmured, cheered. Ibrahim's turn came, his voice steady, the kind that makes you pause without realizing. "Revolution is not in the marching, it is in the meaning. If your grandmother would not recognize your freedom, then it's not freedom yet." That day birthed more than applause, it birthed action. New seats were created in churches, in school gyms, in prisons. Virtual rooms opened across time zones, one in Cairo at dawn, another in Oakland past midnight. Each became a little chamber of transformation, echoing with accents, contradictions, and courage. And still they kept it real. Ibrahim used the growing platform to push back on international mining contracts that exploited African land. Jasmine began mentoring a group of Gen Z leaders who'd never seen themselves reflected in politics. When critics called it theater, she responded, "Good, it's time people realize they're actors too." When skeptics doubted Ibrahim's motives, he smiled quietly and walked barefoot into a village school he had helped fund, with money saved from slashing military travel budgets. It was never about proving they were right. It was about proving that dignity doesn't require permission. Soon, a mural appeared in Johannesburg. 2 outlines, one of Jasmine, one of Ibrahim, side by side under the words, "One seat can start a revolution." Kids posed in front of it, smiling. Old men nodded at it, remembering. And in the cities, online, on campus walls, and in refugee camps, the message was passed on like scripture. If two strangers can meet mid-air and find a shared purpose, what's stopping the rest of us? The day came to be known as the Awakening Flight. Not officially, of course, no one declared it. But in whispered stories, in viral posts, and in conversations between generations, that moment lived on. It wasn't about the flight itself or even the photo. It was what followed, 1,000 invisible threads stitched together by the quiet courage of two people who could have let the moment pass, but didn't. Jasmine was back in Congress, but not unchanged. Her office walls now displayed hand-drawn maps from young activists in the global South. She quoted village poets in hearings. She brought testimonies from Detroit mothers and Congolese farmers to rooms that usually echoed with indifference, and she made space, literal space, by rearranging her floor seating for community guests instead of corporate donors. Figurative space by making sure the unheard were not just invited, but centered. Ibrahim remained in Burkina Faso, weathering the storms of leadership in a land constantly pulled by global forces. But he had begun something that couldn't be stopped, a regional alliance of youth-led cooperatives, each named after moments of resistance, each funded by micro-donations from across the diaspora. He refused offers to commercialize the movement. He declined press exclusives. He didn't need a spotlight. He needed infrastructure, solar panels, books, tools. Together they had written a blueprint without blue ink, drafted not in strategy sessions, but in sincerity. And their story kept spreading. One day, a little boy in New Orleans was asked by his teacher what he wanted to be when he grew up. He thought for a second, then said, "I want to be a seat." The teacher, confused, asked what he meant. He smiled and replied, "Like the one they sat in? The kind that starts something." In a refugee camp outside Bamako, a teenage girl wrote a short story titled 30,000 Feet and Rising. It was about two strangers who changed the sky by listening. And every year on the anniversary of that flight, people gather, physically or virtually, to sit, just sit, in silence. To remember that real power doesn't shout. It listens, it asks questions, it finds another person's eyes, holds their truth for a moment, and then says, "Let's begin." That was the legacy. Not buildings, not bills, but something subtler, deeper, possibility. And in that they created a new kind of global map, not made of borders, but of bridges. Not drawn with pens, but with presence. And so wherever you are, on a train, in a cafe, scrolling late into the night, remember this. The next seat you take might not just be a seat. It might be the beginning of everything. The story of Ibrahim Traoré and Jasmine Crockett began with a delay, a simple inconvenience that turned into a profound moment of alignment. What made their story unforgettable wasn't just who they were, but how they chose to see each other. Through a shared seat on a turbulent flight, they reminded the world that sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't shouting over someone, it's listening beside them. Jasmine brought the fire of American streets into rooms that had forgotten how to feel. Ibrahim carried the weight of post-colonial memory with the grace of someone who believes the future is worth fighting for. Together they sparked a movement, not with laws or protests, but with presence, humility, and relentless belief in everyday people. And that's the lesson. Power isn't only held in capitals or behind podiums. It's in you, in your conversations, in your decisions to stay curious, to ask more, to sit with discomfort and see beyond the noise. Ask yourself, who are you sitting next to right now? What conversations have you been avoiding? What truth have you heard but haven't acted on? This story is yours too. And I want to hear from you. What did this make you feel? What seat have you taken that changed your life? Drop a comment so others can see and be inspired. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know and gives me the energy to keep creating meaningful stories like this one.